island full of noises, sounds, and sweet and sweet airs that give delight.
Yeah.
And of course, it's back in the program again. That quote is back in the program because of the Ariel songs last night.
Mm-hmm.
And as we arrived on Saturday, and we just kind of basically came off the ship from Germany, and we charged straight up and went straight in, and I hadn't even looked to see what was on. And I sat down, and you started playing, and this quote came back to me.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know who you were, or because I hadn't prepared anything. So this quote came back to me, and then I found out what your name was.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And what you were playing, was exactly.
This was a Saturday night, the Sharino.
It was the Sharino.
That's what I figured, but. Yeah.
And it was just, this is why I like to come to that. So thank you very much for sort of getting me into the swing, after a lovely but long drive to get here.
Mm-hmm.
But let's not worry about me, because we're talking about you, really. I also eavesdropped your masterclass.
Oh.
And there was, I'd like to sort of remind you of something you said. You actually used the expression "sounds from another world."
Oh.
When you were talking to the quartet.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean to you, sounds from another world? Because it actually figures with the quote from The Tempest as well.
Yeah. I think, I think one thing that music can do is kind of, evoke different states or different places, and maybe some of those that you haven't really explored or been that familiar with in your own life. And I think in some of these pieces, the interesting thing, I mean, music, of course, it's about sound. That's what we create is sound. But just making sound in itself, even though we can create beautiful sounds, we learn to make beautiful sounds on our instruments, but sound by itself is not music. But the music has to, it kind of gets complicated. Music can do an infinite number of things, which is also why I love it, but some of it can be more abstract and so on. Yeah. But a lot about being an interpreter, to me, is taking the listeners on a journey or giving them an experience where they're surprised by things or following the development of this piece. And so I'm often looking for those those sounds that are just, they kind of take your breath away a bit. Just like if you're, like for me, being here, I've never been in Bantry before, and I walk and I turn a corner and I'm like, oh, it's,
Can you develop that a little more? I mean, everyone we've spoken to so far has already been here. This is your first time. And can you just describe what it was like when you arrived? And
it was, from arriving at the airport at Cork and then driving in, just seeing the landscape unfolding around me and all the green of the farmland. And I came from New York City, which is where I've lived. Here's the contrast could not be more different. And then coming into the town here and then coming to this incredible Bantry house and then seeing the water and smelling the water and feeling that air was really, I felt truly transported to a new place for me. I've been a little bit to Ireland, but also mainly in Dublin, which is sort of a bit more urban. And so it's wonderful for the imagination.
And how do I phrase it? or does this have a major, or can you describe any effect that this might have on the way you work on a piece and eventually perform it while you're here at the festival?
Well, excuse me. Well, I think both the stimulation and the excitement of being surrounded by such beauty really is so inspiring. And also what I find wonderful in this festival is, on one hand, there's this kind of this feeling of peace in this place as a whole. This town really feeling so at one with the nature around it, both the ocean and the greenery, and feeling the air coming in off the ocean. And I think I was talking about this with some of the performers too. It gives you this kind of sense of calm. Yeah. But on the other hand, we're very focused on what we're doing with the music too. So I think, it both gives you this kind of wonderful sort of state of mind and state of being to work from, but then getting all this, just kind of feeling delighted every day, just to wake up and you see what's happening around you with all the weather and the birds and everything. It's kind of
because I'd forgotten about it, but you just reminded me of it. Another quote from your masterclass. You actually said, "Enjoy the floating."
Oh.
And it sounds as if you've come.
Yeah.
Here, well, since you've been in Bantry, you and Miranda have been enjoying the floating.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And from what I could see, you sort of communicated that to the young musicians in the group there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
An audience as well.
Hmm?
Oh yeah, what was that? It's a little head there.
Right. And when it comes to playing pieces like I'm going to say Salvatore because the Sciarrino.
Yes.
You know it's going to be a challenge for the audience.
Mm-hmm.
You know that before you.
You're right.
So what? What do you do? What do you do? How do you do you monitor things, or do you just? I don't know. What do you do?
Well, I'm aware that music and those kinds of sounds will probably be unfamiliar to many of them, but I feel like the piece as a whole is a wonderful piece of music. Like it's I try to really focus on that, like whatever the musical language might be, whether I'm playing Beethoven or Bartók, or I'm doing something like Sciarrino. Just thinking about the content of the piece and these moods that he's set, it's incredibly vivid what he did with that. And some of them are more just kind of dreamy, like especially that second the Caprice. It's very dreamy, these wave-like things coming out of silence, and then some of them are more kind of impish or or a little goofy even, sometimes some of those sounds. And just going for those characters, which I think anybody would respond to or relate to, and draw them in that way. So besides, some of them might be saying like, wow, what is she doing on the instrument? And that's, so of course, can be fascinating in itself. But that can also, I mean, the piece is pretty substantially long too, like was 25 minutes or something. So if you're just kind of doing these funny sounds and doing these things, they might think about that for a few minutes, but then then what, but you have to really draw them into this, and that piece definitely, I feel like it's a kind of like a fairyland world that he creates.
That's exactly what I wanted. You took the word out of my mouth. You took me into another fairyland, and I didn't want to leave it. And at some point, I knew or felt that you were going to signal this is the end of the fairyland. And I was fascinated to find out what it would be. I mean, the piece would have to come to an end.
Right.
You know, and the composer and the performer would know that, you know, we're now getting to the end.
Right.
And somehow the audience might pick up that it to the end.
Yeah.
And I was sort of listening very carefully. No, this isn't the end. No, this isn't the end. No, this isn't the end.
You're right.
Yeah. When I used to work here, I would have known how long the piece would be, because, but anyway, no, I don't do that anymore. And that was what was really, really wonderful, and seeing and hearing so many. I mean, it really was. It was Prospero's Island. I mean, it was just unbelievable. When I assume you're meeting musicians here that you've never met before, or
yes,
or you may have known of but not actually worked with before.
Right, exactly.
Can you tell us a bit what it's like? You know, when suddenly saying, "Would you play this with this piece with this person?"
Right. Well, it's been wonderful to meet some of these people. There are people, I've heard of, and I get to hear them online, of course, and everybody has videos and recordings, and then now and then, of course, living in New York, you sometimes get to go hear people when they come through. But it's wonderful to be able to have that direct rapport and to get to know each other and create something in the moment together, and create new friendships here. And it's also it's wonderful to be here. I have to say, as an American musician, and meeting more European musicians and just participating in that.
Do you find that when you play a piece which might be familiar with which you would be familiar with, but when you play it with musicians you've never worked with before, that the piece somehow grows or develops?
Oh yes.
And suddenly, I never noticed that.
Yeah.
Before.
Absolutely.
Does that happen very often, or is it part of the process?
Yeah, it usually happens to some degree. Sometimes it might be something pretty subtle, like you're already kind of on the same page in terms of how you hear the piece, particularly if it's a very well-known piece, I suppose. But sometimes not, and then you're, you have a lot of different perspectives to bring to it. But sometimes, somebody just has a certain personality that's bringing out a certain quality in the piece that might not have been so pronounced to you before. And because it's them, you start hearing it a certain way, and you can respond to it that way.
Another expression you used, I can't, was something like "go with the ebb and flow of the energy." This is you use this with your students in the masterclass. Go with the ebb and flow of the energy, and I thought that was wonderful. But then it starts. What is the energy? Is it the energy of the score? Is it each other's energy? Is it the energy that you're bringing into this process? Is it the energy that all these people seem to be behind you absolutely still and not daring to move? They're also bringing this stuff in. And possibly even the noise of the press hammer outside. What role does energy have? How would you talk about energy? Because some people say energy.
Yes, energy, takes many forms, of course. I think as a player, it comes from those sources, but the piece itself, you're trying to tap into this energy that's in the piece, and you're sort of channeling the composer, and in the case of the ones that are not here or not around anymore, it becomes, I often say it's like being an actor. It's a rather mysterious thing, of course, but if you're playing, say, Beethoven, and we're trying to get into Beethoven's soul and psyche, and that's why we, all these people write biographies, and and all the scholars are trying to figure out who this man was. But it's a little bit of a kind of actor-like process that we as players or interpreters get into, like trying to get into this role. So that's a kind of energy we're trying to kind of, whether it's more intellectual in terms of what information we absorb, or this kind of much more intuitive thing that we're responding to. And then, of course, in performance, it's our own personal energy and what we're feeling kind of impelled to send out, or in terms of communicating and knowing there's an audience there. And then in chamber music, of course, between each other. And that's where it gets particularly spontaneous in terms of feeling somebody's ebb and flow of their own emotions, or like they're getting really excited now. How do you want to play with that? Or they're molding the music in a certain way because they're feeling it. So you're kind of going with that.
And would you say this ebb and flow of emotions or emotional energy is not just amongst the musicians, but between the musicians and the audience? I mean, do you feel that coming in, and that's part of the the audience's energy is part of the flow that you kind of go with, or you don't always go with it. Sometimes you take advantage of it. And
all kinds of things can happen, of course. And it's interesting as a performer to go and play, different places, and or even the same place, just depending on the night. But sometimes you can get an audience that really seems to be sort of interacting with you quite a bit. Or you get audiences that just seem super hushed and still, and that can be a matter of that they're so riveted and they're so focused. But also in some places you get just a kind of reserved audience, and then but it doesn't necessarily mean anything either. I think it really depends. Like, as a performer, sometimes you can kind of feed off that, or also you get a bit more of a kind of direct kind of interaction going as a performer, and you're a little more conscious of putting on that. I don't mean putting on in a
no.
but just performing for them. But sometimes it's. I also get sort of interested in the kind of external and internal sides of being a musician, because obviously a lot of it is what's happening within you, and sometimes what works best is actually to be so immersed and deeply inside your feeling about the music and what you're doing that the audience is just drawn to you. And like a magnet,
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Oh, that's the
rather than you have to.
Yeah, as a member of the audience, that is something that I know happens. In fact, happened last Saturday. Just one last question. In the talk in the other morning, did I understand correctly that you like to explore the idea of music and other art forms?
Yes.
Can you say one or two words about that? I mean, we know about jazz and poetry and folk dances, music, of course.
Well, I like to see how, just how music interacts with people in different states and different ways of expression, and besides just playing music for dance or music inspired by literature, of which there's a tremendous amount. As someone who does quite a bit of contemporary music, I'm so interested in collaborating with artists who are expressing themselves in various ways besides just sound or just instruments, and finding ways finding ways in which these things can heighten each other, and have this sort of synergistic effect, so that there's, I mean, I suppose that's always the aim, even like with opera and everything. But and also even within music, I find there's there's a lot of that's within music itself. Like for instance, dance. There's all the physical aspects of being a musician also. So it's not really that different. And I think sometimes if you really think about, for instance, like how you're moving when you finish a phrase, or it's directly tied to like how would you choreograph this if you were a dancer? And also visually, in terms of live performance, so much of it is, even though we're making music, but it's such a visual experience too. So if you think about how a theater director stages an event in terms of the space you're in, or the effect of one performer being here and there, and just kind of combining all these disciplines. So, so besides the very pure thing about dealing with the piece and the sound and everything.
Is there something? There's something I'm not sure it was right to record, but you know the Elbphilharmonie in Hamburg.
Yeah, the new place.
This piece by Haas. It was played in Bonn, where I live.
Oh.
And it basically you went in, and when I went in and sat down, and the stage was set for the orchestra, and all the instruments were there.
Yeah.
I sat on the chairs, and then suddenly this music started coming from somewhere else.
Oh, yeah.
And slowly you realised that there was a quartet over there, and there was something else over there,
right.
And there was and then at some point they would slowly drift down without any instruments, and then pick up the instruments on the stage, and so and it was non-stop. I mean, and it was absolutely wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful. Just the way people went down the stairs, down to the stage, down the side of the audience, and the way they picked, just the way they. I mean, I don't know to what extent it was choreographed, but it was almost just even the picking up of the instrument was important, because somebody else was playing somewhere else, and then they would start. The musicians on the stage would start playing, and so the music was non-stop, and then eventually, so that the last people could come down from these various places where they were.
Wow.
And listening to you yesterday morning, I thought, I must ask you about. Is that what you? Mean?
Yeah, I'm very interested in they talk about spatialization in general. That's something I've gone into, and Georg is somebody I've worked. I heard about that piece.
Yeah.
And he's actually writing a violin concerto for me.
It's this guy Haas, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, that's.
So actually, I don't think it's going to involve anything like that, but.
No,
but
there was, when you read something, and there's a connection, but you're not sure what the connection is.
Yeah.
And I was too shy to ask you whether is this the same guy.
Yeah, it's the guy.
Thank you for telling me.
Yeah. But he's been doing some.
It's just mind blasting.
He's a great composer. But the spatialization thing, what I was sort of beginning to describe to you, I'm just starting working with a collective of artists. We're going to meet in August for the first time, and developing projects. Like there's a theater director and some dancers and some other musicians. But actually, the thing I wanted to do is develop a show like me playing violin, but all exploring aspects of spatialization and using some electronics and things like that. And I've done some others. Like there's a piece by Luigi Nono that I play, and I walk around. He stipulated in the score out.
So it's kind of not choreographed, but
somewhat. He leaves it up to the performer to some degree.
Yeah.
But he says you choose where your stations are.
Right.
And also the timing is up to the performer. But then you play, and then you move around as you like. in
Yeah.
the space, and you're kind of embodying this wanderer figure. It's a beautiful piece. I played it quite a few times, so I enjoy those
But
things.
It somehow brings me back to my hobby horse, which is energy. If you have physical and emotional and intellectual and spiritual energy, what you just described about choosing the stations, it sounds as if one's much more likely to be engaged almost consciously with these various aspects
Oh,
of
yeah.
energy. And so as you know, what is it that takes me to that space, or what is
Right.
it about it? Yeah.
Right.
That's
Yeah, it's a great process.
Listen, you've got a lot of work to do. Thank you. I could sit here and talk to you for all day, but you've got a lot of work to do, and you've got to get to